Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor for Shadowproof. I'm here to give you an update on the primaries that proceeded in Illinois, Arizona, and Florida without respect for the heightened public health risks that exist as a result of this coronavirus pandemic. It's rather stunning when you think about it. We had organized, I worked with Brad Johnson to co-organize a petition that had over 2,500 people, including 150 plus medical professionals who all shared their own comments, pointed to what would happen if these primaries proceeded today, warned these public officials in the states that they needed to find a way to allow participation without going on with this in-person voting. Simply, the CDC guidance, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have put forward this guidance that 10 plus people gathering in one location would be risky, would maybe lead to more spreading of this virus. And when you look at the curve, look at where we are right now in this pandemic. We are in the phase where we're seeing cases double in some parts of the country. They're going up exponentially, and the risk of mixing people by holding these elections right now is just something that boggles the mind, that people are so reckless in the Democratic National Committee, within these state governments, and that they have gone forward with these primaries and even spoken out against states that have had an interest in canceling the in-person voting, expanding other ways of participating. It's incredible. So today we had 3 states go forward. Importantly, Ohio found a way around this, and they canceled the in-person voting for the time being. Their Ohio Public Health Department director, the health department director there, declared that all the polling places were health emergency risks, and backed up Governor DeWine, who made this very clear that people shouldn't have to choose between their civic duty and avoiding getting sick, that they shouldn't have to, okay, if you stay home and you don't go out to vote, then you're not going to be able to participate in the election. But if you go out to vote, then you might risk spreading the virus, and you might contract or come into contact with it and bring it back home to your family. So they found a way to not go forward with it today, and they're going to be holding in-person voting later in June. And in the meantime, they're expanding, or they're going to work with a court to expand mail-in voting. So this is one way we're doing it. And so here at Shadowproof, we're calling this the coronavirus primary, and this is what it is. People are going out, they're risking getting this virus, and many of them are being told to go vote for Joe Biden, who is opposed to Medicare for all. So in this highly dystopian world that we are living in, this is the reality. So we are seeing reporting coming in from these several states. And what is clear is that in Illinois, it is a complete and total mess. This is where I am. I'm a resident. I actually have not gone out to vote yet in this primary. There are still a few hours for me to get out and vote, but I will be going to a polling place location to observe for a very brief amount of time, 5 or 10 minutes, what is happening at a polling place location. I'm on the north side of Chicago, so we'll see. There's a long line in Wrigleyville, Chicago. There's a line in a library in Lincoln Park, and they're not practicing social distancing. So it's possible that people in this tighter space in this library are spreading the virus. We have reports in Illinois that remarkably, in the morning, there were 50 precincts out of 2,000 that had to wait for supplies. They were not able to open. We've had numerous stories from people who went to go vote, found that the locations were just not even open at all. And one of the stories that I had contributed to me from a professor in Cook County, Illinois, which is the major county that has Chicago in its county, said, I went to my polling place early today. It was closed. An election official showed up to inform me that judges quit and that they are scrambling to get it going, end quote. I put together these threads over on Twitter at Kevin Gosztola, which is the name down in the left-hand corner there. You could go and see. I've been tracking what is happening with the Illinois primary, what has gone on with the Florida primary and the Arizona primary to a much lesser extent, because there have been very few problems comparatively reported from within the state of Arizona. In Illinois, it seems like the prime example for why a state should not proceed with in-person voting during this pandemic. You have the fact that locations where sites were relocated away from, say, a senior citizen's home or assisted living places, that they are not accessible to people with disabilities, that people don't know where these new locations were supposed to be. You have election judges quitting, not showing up to polling places. There's an election judge who shared, Illinois primary is a complete disaster. Polling places have been eliminated with no notice to voters. I'm an election judge sitting on my couch with no place to go. My friend just showed up at hers and the doors are locked. This whole primary should be invalid. There's a photo that went viral in a city called Barrington, Illinois, which is a burb of Chicago, that an election judge just didn't show up. The people who were coming to this location were simply told, contact the county, go to the voting website. You'll figure it out yourself if you'd like to vote in this primary. I mean, it's unbelievable. And voter reports were coming in from one person who was told to come back 30 to 40 minutes later. And this place that he had went to, a polling place nearby Chicago, had been closed for 3 hours. As of 10 a.m., keep in mind that's 4 hours into the primary day in Illinois, we had 10% of locations in that the Chicago Board of Elections is responsible for, they were still closed. They had not opened. Yeah, that's 4 hours of time that people who vote could not go and participate. What is the extent of this voter suppression? What's going to mean for the ultimate outcome of this primary? Who knows? But people who wanted to go participate in that time were turned away. And if they had to go back home, take care of their kids, if they had some other obligations they had to take care of during this tumultuous time, then maybe they just are not going to be voting in this primary. There's one voter who showed up, was told they needed their ID, and they're actually from an assisted living center. And actually in Illinois, you do not need your ID to vote. So they went back to their assisted living center. I mean, they could, but they didn't want to go back to their assisted living center, get the ID, and then come back to the polling place again. All that movement, you could really be spreading the virus even more so than you already are by going out to vote. So this person just decided not to participate and not vote because they were asked inappropriately for their ID. There are countless examples out there. We're going to see more streaming in as the time goes on. One election judge pointed out that they were not actually given guidance and training to wipe down the voting machines. They were not instructed on how to actually manage and sanitize and practice good coronavirus safety during this pandemic. We've heard reports of people who work these polling places being responsible for having to bring their supplies, that the Board of Elections were not providing these cleaning supplies to maintain and sanitize the polling place. So this is what's been happening in Illinois all day today. And in fact, it erupted, tensions erupted between the Chicago Board of Elections and the state governor, J.B. Pritzker, who you may have seen on the news. He was getting some credibility because he stood up for everyone who was stuck in O'Hare International Airport, and they were all crammed in there. And the Homeland Security, or the people who were managing these screenings at the airport, were just tremendously disorganized, and it was super dysfunctional, and it was putting everybody at risk because they were traveling from abroad, and who knows how much of the virus was spread. And so J.B. Pritzker stood up and he called out Donald Trump and got a lot of attention. But all those people came back, and they went home. And if they're in the Chicago area or any part of Illinois, they have the option to vote in this primary today. And they're mixing among the population potentially. And even if they were told to quarantine for 14 days, maybe some of them chose to come out because there's been a lot of guidance that would lead people to believe it's safe to go vote so long as they follow certain steps. And some of this advice is not entirely based in science. It's just layman people making it up as they go so that they can justify pressing on with a primary that was scheduled before there was this global pandemic. So J.B. Pritzker and the Chicago Board of Elections are now going at it with each other, and the election officials have indicated to reporters that they wanted to move to a mail-in only model and cancel the in-person voting today. We've seen very low turnout in the city of Chicago. I'm here in Chicago. There's been very low turnout. J.B. Pritzker endorsed Vice President Joe Biden on March 16th. So the day before the primary, he announced this endorsement. It's very clear that we were pushing onward with this primary simply because it was necessary to get the votes in and get the delegates apportioned to Biden as quickly as possible so he could get closer to clinching that nomination. And the public health was sacrificed, and in the process of sacrificing public health, we also saw voter suppression happen, and that's what's been unfolding here. There are countless numbers of people who probably could sue the state for voter disenfranchisement, that they have a case. There are people who may be locked down in senior living facilities and cannot go out to vote. There are people who are immunocompromised who probably could not go out to vote. Only in the last 5 days did this really escalate and become the pandemic that we're all taking seriously. So yes, there was early voting available. Yes, there was a mail-in voting option, but maybe people didn't avail themselves of those options because they didn't realize how serious this was a week ago. And then they were caught in a predicament of, well, maybe I don't want to go out, and I have not requested that mail-in ballot. So what do I do now? And the state did not stand up for its voters, it did not stand up for its residents and do the steps that could have been taken in order to accommodate people. Simply put, Ohio became this model of what people could do in their state, officials could do in their state. All you do is you declare that the polling places are now health emergencies. If people can't gather in them, then they are not safe for people to be in, so you shut them down. And you declare the health emergency, and then you go to the court and you say, because of this health emergency, we need to come up with an alternative. We need to further extend mail-in voting. We need to send out more ballots. We need to count votes later. We need to reschedule the in-person voting to a later date in, let's say, May or June, when it might be more safe after the coronavirus pandemic has peaked here in the United States. And then, I don't know what we're going to be seeing. Will there be decisions state by state? So then is it going to be an issue of, okay, where is this peaking state by state, with states making their own decisions about when the pandemic peaked? All right, so the Illinois government could have set a date based on how they see this playing out in the foreseeable future. But what we saw in Arizona is that they actually hid behind this uncertainty of not knowing how severe this is all going to get. And so they basically said, yeah, it's bad for people now. It's going to be bad for people later. Well, let's jam through this and get this Arizona primary out of the way. And people who don't want to get sick, sorry, that's just the way things are. So you should have voted by mail, and if you were planning to vote in person, there's really nothing we can do for you. And that's essentially how the Secretary of State there has treated this whole pandemic and its impact on the coronavirus, on this primary. So, in Florida, what we've seen is there was actually a lawsuit filed by the Dream Defenders and these other organizations in Florida that wanted to get vote by mail options extended, and that was shut down. But there's still an effort to proceed onward and probably appeal that lawsuit. But there, what we're seeing is that, again, safety at these polling places not entirely being taken into account, precautions not being taken very well, lack of hand sanitizer, people concerned because there's a significantly elderly population. The Broward County in Florida has had the most reported coronavirus cases, and yet there's someone who went to vote who reported that he saw no precautions at the polling place, no hand sanitizer, no social distancing, no warning signs to turn away if sick, which is a big problem. And there are people who are not properly notified of where their polling place was being shifted to. There's reporting suggesting that 800 or so people who were supposed to staff just didn't show up to some of these locations. How many of these places just didn't open, and what are people supposed to do in order to still participate? Palm Beach County Elections Department had, and like I said, this is where it was the worst, 800 volunteers backed out as of Monday, and they only were able to find 100 new volunteers to offer to take their place. So you have a supremely dysfunctional situation within this pandemic. People reporting that while they were at the polls, there's technically like nobody there. So you can expect extremely low turnout, and you can expect that part of that is going to involve voter suppression. One of the things that was done by this lawsuit, that they're trying to represent people who were told to quarantine and could not get back home. And they were also trying to represent people who were older and had problems with their immune system or sicknesses that made it risky for them to go out to vote. And there's this stunning report that was shared by the Dream Defenders by someone. I'll just read it to you. Hey, not sure what you can do with this information, but went to the county elections office today to cast votes for people who are unable to be home to vote because of quarantine. There's a whole process in place where the voter can provide an affidavit to designate someone else to pick up a ballot for them on the day of an election. We were not allowed to participate in this process due to not having a physician's note to explain why they were not present. Quarantine due to coronavirus travel restrictions was not a valid reason. And maybe I'll say that again just so you can let that all sink in. Quarantining was not a good enough reason for getting the government to give them a mail-in ballot so that they could all participate in the election. These people who were quarantined due to coronavirus travel restrictions. And so this is what's been unfolding in Florida. Like I said, in Arizona has not been as severe as in the state of Illinois, but it's still been a mess. And above all this, what we've seen is today the postponement of the primary in Maryland. And meanwhile, you have the Democratic National Committee's Rules and Bylaw Committee, I believe, is threatening to retaliate against states for the simple fact that they are looking out for the health of voters. The simple fact that they are trying to manage the untenable situation in which they find themselves, where they are trying to facilitate a presidential primary and primaries for down ballot candidates at the same time that there is this great public health risk to everyone at a time when there are places throughout the country where people are being ordered to shelter in place and not go out of their homes. And you're seeing this threat that they abide by this June 9th deadline, or else they might face a 50% reduction in their delegates. It's obscene, it's appalling, and I can't even believe that DNC Chair Tom Perez could go on MSNBC and talk about respecting what these governments are doing, when in the meantime there are officials at the DNC that are applying pressure behind the scenes to prevent states from moving these primaries in such a way that they could hold them when it'll be more safe for people to vote. I think people need to definitely register their discontent, not only with DNC officials, but with Democrats who are within this party, and they need to demand more leadership. Suspending these primaries during the global pandemic, during this coronavirus pandemic, is not caving into authoritarianism. It's not putting democracy at risk. It's protecting the public's health in a very basic sense. That is all it is. These are state decisions. It is not emboldening Donald Trump to do anything, because through leadership, what people could show is that they are putting democracy on hold, and they will return to it when it is safe to do so. I don't know how many of you have been able to have any sort of conversations with anyone in your family about whether they should vote for Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders in the last week. I don't know how many of you really particularly cared about what happened in the debate, because the backdrop was this coronavirus pandemic. And how do you move people any other direction in this primary to get them to support one person over the other? How do you work as a volunteer and call up people and ask them to vote when in fact you know that they could be going out and spreading the virus? And then that brings me to where I want to close here, because Joe Biden's campaign is still putting out this appalling, absolutely appalling guidance and these memos to the media talking about this in such a way that Republicans would talk about disasters. The Biden team put out this memo. We held elections during the Civil War, the 1918 flu pandemic, and World War II. We are confident that we can meet the same challenge today and continue to uphold the core functions and values of our democracy. I don't know. Somehow we need people to step up from the Sanders campaign. We need people to step up from other offices. There needs to be something to counter this. There are progressive groups that have been out today trying to monitor the vote and respond to people who are reporting instances of voter suppression or disenfranchisement. And what they're essentially doing is lending legitimacy to this whole entire process. The results that are going to be announced in the next few hours, simply put, are illegitimate. Not everyone who wanted to participate were able to participate. All officials are on notice, and they know that they weren't able to participate. They know there's this cloud of fear that is hung over these primaries, and they know that that's a severe impairment to the credibility that these primaries once had. They are no longer credible primaries. There's no reason why anyone should believe the results are legitimate. And let's look at what may have happened. I mean, I don't know this to be true, but if you're Joe Biden's campaign, you're in the middle of a pandemic where the people who have been turning out for your campaign in the largest numbers are being the most impacted by this pandemic, and you're still telling them that they need to go vote and put their health at risks. The polls that we had just days ago, there was a Hill Harris poll showing that 77% of people who support Joe Biden were 65 or older. 65% of people who support Joe Biden, or 65% was the number being registered among 50 to 64-year-olds. And this was, in that age range, this was the other. So that would translate into 23%, 65 or older or lower being in favor of Bernie. Actually, in that poll, 13% of 65 or older said they would support Bernie. So then Other polls, there was a YouGov poll where 73% of people were saying in the 65 or older demographic that Biden would be their first choice. 45 to 64 range, the 64%, that would be their first choice. So he is threatening to make the people who support him and provide the backbone to his campaign ill. He is encouraging them to go out and vote, and their lives are possibly at risk. It's absolutely incredible that he won't hit pause, and that maybe this campaign is that concerned about their ability to keep pressing onward in this primary because they need to lock this up as quickly as possible. And that's unconscionable. It's frankly unconscionable. I want people to recognize that the calendar going forward is going to be a certain way. But first, let me backtrack here before I get too far ahead of myself. We don't know what the results are going to be, but what if the margins of difference between the vote, the amount that Biden beats Bernie Sanders, is substantially lower than it was originally expected, because these people who have been turning out for Biden did not go to the polls. They didn't get to mail in their ballots. They did not early vote, and so they were disenfranchised. Do we not think that Joe Biden won't try to challenge the outcome of these results? Or put another way, do we not think that if there are still a lot of irregularities and people are still angry, do we not think that Bernie Sanders doesn't have some kind of responsibility to take a stand for these people and say, whoa, we need to extend this mail-in voting. There should be additional time for people to vote, and these results, whatever is announced tonight, should not be final. There should be a chance for people to add their votes to this. It's completely unconventional. It defies a lot of the rules. I recognize that. But yet, it's what makes sense, because it's staring us right in the face that people want to participate and cannot do that. So the calendar. Going forward, the calendar. We do not have any more coronavirus primaries in March. We have Alaska and Hawaii on the calendar, April 4th and then Wisconsin has a primary on April 7th. And they're basically pushing everyone to do what makes sense, which is to vote by absentee ballot. They have not talked about canceling the in-person voting, but that's something that is up there as a possibility. On April 28th, we have Connecticut, Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island planning to hold their votes. New York is contemplating sending everyone who is registered voter these ballots that they could mail back in. Maryland, keep in mind, had an April 28th date for the primary and canceled. Kansas is May 2nd, along with the territory of Guam. You have Indiana on May 5th, and then Nebraska and West Virginia on May 12th. We may be in a better state as far as the pandemic goes in May, but we definitely know that April is untenable. What are these states going to do? And I tell you, I think the answer is that the work that I've been doing in the last 4 days to engage in activism, which I typically don't do this kind of activism along with journalism, but I have been in a very nonpartisan way concerned about the health of people, and I insist upon that. I'm not really certain that postponing actually changes the dynamic for Bernie Sanders' campaign. They have to do a whole lot to shift this way that people have viewed the election, the way they view it now. A lot is working in Joe Biden's favor, frankly, and I just don't know why they don't feel like they can continue to benefit from the state of the race and just allow people to vote later. So what we need to do is all these people in all these states, these officials need to expand mail-in voting, and they need to, frankly, just cancel the in-person voting for this particular primary. They need to make it clear to people that if they want to vote, they're going to have to mail in their ballots, and that's the way to participate. The CDC guidance, as we said at the top, prevents people from being able to vote in person. It says that it's not safe, that people are becoming vectors of the virus. And yeah, like all of us younger people, led to believe that we're not really that risky. It's not that risky for us to be out. So we could all go vote. And maybe a lot of us all voted in huge numbers today, and much more so than older people. That's going to tip the outcome and the results. But I think, again, like that's based in its own set type of pseudoscience, because we're vectors. Who knows if we're carriers of the virus and we're spreading it to people? We might be bringing it back home to our families if we contract it while we're out and about. So we shouldn't be so selfish to go out there and think that nothing is going wrong while we are out there. So this is where we are at. There'll be results, and I'll come back when there are results, and I'll talk about them. Talk about further developments with the coronavirus primary and any more fallout between Pritzker and the Chicago Board of Elections, which wanted to cancel the in-person voting. Continue to dig into the politics of all this. We're seeing tribalism. It's just total tribalism, with people suggesting that because Donald Trump might want to suspend elections, that Democrats can't be seen as suspending elections. And that's making public health fall by the wayside. It's also meaning that voter disenfranchisement takes place among everyone in virtually every single demographic that should matter. So with that said, I thank you for tuning in to this, again, thorough, and I typically do rather lengthy reports. I thank you for supporting my work at shadowproof.com. The work at shadowproof.com will continue to cover this, and you can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gosztola, as you can see in the bottom left corner. And everyone, stay safe, and solidarity. Talk to you all later.